Okie dokie. How is everybody doing? There we go. Okay, great. Are these comfy sofas or what? Are these the best sofas you've ever had at the conference? Yes, definitely. How's the coffee? Good? All right. Thank you for being here. This is amazing. We're doing it again, apparently. SRE Day. And this year we're doing 2 of those. And I couldn't be more excited. Probably because I had 3 coffees already and I prepared this last night. So let's do a quick raise of hands. Who is in an actual SRE role in their job title? Hands up. Okay, so that's about half of you. Keep your hands up. Who's doing actual SRE work while being the title? Okay, that's not too bad. That's majority of that. Okay, who are the other people? What are you doing here? what are you doing? Engineering manager. Okay, fine. We'll let it pass. Anything else? Any chaos engineering people? Okay, talk to me after school. We've got 1 chaos engineering. There you go. A round of applause for chaos engineering. Any DevOps? Anybody DevOpsing? Okay. Any developers who haven't updated there? There you go. Okay. They haven't updated their job title on LinkedIn. Okay, amazing. So we've got 2 days of this. There's going to be plenty of talks. We've got 3 screens. Some of you are doing this every year, so you know the drill. But we're going to kick off by spending about... Oh, no, it doesn't. Oh, there you go. We're going to start by telling you a story. Are you comfortable in your sofas? I want you to open the eye of the imagination. And let's talk about SRE's worst nightmare. So who has recently had an embarrassing bad outage? Just 1 person. There we go. Okay, fine. The rest you can go. This guy gets me. So I want to talk to you about the story of Citicorp Center, later known as Citigroup Center, and then later known as 601 Lexington. Are there any New Yorkers or any spiritual New Yorkers in the room? No? Okay. That's good. So Citigroup building looks like this. It's a little weird, you'll notice. To me, it looks like a giant popsicle. It's got this big popsicle stick in the core of it, and then it's got this weird stilts. More on that later. It's 59 stories tall, and the first 9 stories are weird. It's on the 53rd and Lex, and it was built in 1977. And I promise all of these things are going to be important. Okay, you had 1 job, clicker. You had 1 job. Sorry. Okay. The building is actually important. Many people see it as iconic. At the time, it cost a lot of money, almost $1 billion in today's money, which is roughly 1% of what Elon Musk lost just this year in his net worth. 7th tallest building in the world at the time, and St. Peter's Lutheran Church with this big arrow. Can you spot the problem here? So the story is that they really wanted to build on this plot, but there was 1 problem. There was already a church in there. The church was built in 1905. It was very nice. So what happens when a church meets a megacorp that has a lot of money? They say, oh, you guys know, we're going to build a better church for you that looks even better, and we're going to move it about 150 meters this way, okay? And it's going to be amazing. It's going to be all good. Don't worry about it. We're just going to hang this big building over that. And that's the reason for all these stilts. The reason they are not where they're supposed to be when they usually are at the corners is because 70 feet above the church, the new church, and we've got this massive building. And the building is cutting edge at the time. 59 stories, the 9 stories of the ground. It looks a little bit like this. This is an actual original drawing from the planning application. And you will see that this popsicle shape is a little problematic, but not to spoil it too much for you. It's got a bunch of other features. So this is built by a famous architect. It's designed by a famous structural engineer as well. And you can see that they went very fancy. They wanted to make sure that this is windproof because New York gets a lot of wind, and New York City introduced regulation that you had to prove that the wind blowing at 90 degrees straight into the wall is not going to topple that. And the problem with tall buildings is that imagine that the wind is coming from the left here and hitting the left edge. It's trying to topple the building to the right. And you've got two different forces. You've got the stretching force on this side of the building that basically tries to rip it apart, and you've got a compressive force on the other side. The other side is being squished. And the normal way of solving that is to just let the gravity do its thing. You just assume that the gravity is going to be stronger based on the mass of the building to hold it all together. And so this was done to the highest standard. The revolutionary idea at the time was to basically give this chevron-like things. So instead of reinforcing every single floor and making the building very heavy, they came up with this amazingly lightweight structure. And by amazingly lightweight, 25,000 tons for the actual structure, which is less than half of the 60,000 tons that went into the Empire State Building. So cutting edge stuff, a lot of high fives, people just generally being very happy with themselves. And not only that, they also went and introduced as 400-ton tuned mass damper. What is a 400-ton introduced mass damper? I didn't have actual photos of the real one, but it looks basically like this one from Taipei 101. It's a giant blob of things that is attached to a few springs, which absorbs a little bit of the movement. And can, in this instance, for this particular building, it was expected to absorb about 40% of the sway. So the building was only supposed to move by about 60 inches at the top, with the winds blowing very hard. Engineering marvel, putting this thing up there, very good stuff, right? So life is going very well, right? It's a little bit suspiciously, maybe going a little bit too good, until we get to June 1978. And someone's career is at stake. So let's take a little inventory of our characters in this little drama. We've got Hugh Stubbins, who's the famous architect. As far as I understand, as far as I remember, he's the junior Stubbins who inherited the company. When you need something built in the 70s that's very fancy, you go call the guy. William or Billy Lemessurier, who a little bit suspiciously doesn't actually pronounce his last name the way it's spelled. Sounds a little bit like Le Chiffre, James Bond villain to me. This is the structural engineering guy, and he's very famous. And he's actually a little bit cocky. You're going to see that in a second. He was 52 at the time, at the peak of his career, and he was basically swimming in awards. The structural engineers rarely they're a little bit like us, right? They're not the flashy CEO guy who went and got an award and is announcing cutting ribbons and stuff. They're the ones actually calculating stuff in there, and hardly anyone ever hears about them unless things go wrong. More on that later. And we've got two seemingly random people, Diane Hartley and Lee the Carolis, who had a similar idea to look into this building more or less at exactly the same time. And to sprinkle a little bit more drama, we will introduce a little bit of extras. 200,000 potential fatalities. So what is that about? So on a beautiful morning in June 1978, the company doing the structural engineering for Lemessurier, his company gets a bunch of calls from some random student at Princeton University who was tasked by their professor Billington to write their actual thesis on the building, because it's very unusual. It's a nice thing. It's very, very flashy. And she did all of that and found one thing missing, the quartering diagonal winds. So this is something that wasn't required by the law, but is something that has interesting implications. She looked into that. She found that her calculations didn't match the viability of the building. She gave them a bunch of calls. They sent her the calculations for the 90-degree winds, and they promised they would send the 45-degree winds calculation afterwards. They never did, because they never actually did the calculation. She was talking to the Joe Weinstein company, and they too were like, yeah, it's all good, don't worry about it, it's gonna be okay. And weirdly, more or less at the same time, you had another person, Lee, who was at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, who was also tasked into looking into that building, but this time not too much into the detail. They were writing like a little paper about why this building is amazing and why we should be paying attention to that. And I actually got a quote from Lemessurier, who basically was bragging about listen, I want you to tell your teacher that he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about because he doesn't know the problem that we had to be solved. It's probably worth mentioning, Lemessurier was also a professor at Harvard. So he would not take criticism that very quickly. So you've got these two people, and more or less, Lemessurier tells them to bugger off. I know what I'm doing. You guys can just go and chill. And it gets a little bit funny because in retrospective, he's actually very explicitly saying, I'm very vain. I would have liked my stuff to be expressed on the outside of the building, but Stubbins wouldn't have it, the architect. In the end, I told myself I didn't give a damn. The structure was there, and I'll be seen by God. There you go. So that's our Lemessurier. So he basically procrastinates on this until one day he decides, you know what, this is fun enough of a subject that I'm actually going to go and talk to my students and boast, and I'm going to try to live solve this problem during a lecture. He goes, attempts the calculations, and turns out that something doesn't necessarily add up. If you look at what the students came up with, I think this is by Diane, if you blow the wind at 45 degree angle, you result with higher forces because you're basically on a smaller rectangle here. So normally you would have the columns in the corners like any other normal building, but hey, we had that little chair sitting here. And that was literally the first time that they actually did the calculation because it wasn't required, right? Not great, but Lemessurier still doesn't do anything about it yet. He goes on to check with few world-leading wind tunnel experts to see maybe we don't need to worry about that. And they conclude that if you hit this with quarter winds at 70 miles an hour, which is not unheard of, you are going to have a bad time. And they calculated that you had 1 in 16 chance of the building actually collapsing. And when they calculated which way the building could go and the surrounding buildings that went with it, it could result in up to 200,000 casualties. Not great, but he still doesn't do anything about it yet. He goes on for a little while, goes to consult his wife in their villa in Maine, and they're having a conversation, and still nothing is really happening. Until he is called to another building that's completely unrelated, but has a similar structure. They were supposed to weld the beams, which gives them a stronger, more rigid structure, which would absorb a little bit more of that wind. But he wasn't aware of the fact that during the construction of the building, they actually replaced the welds with bolts, which is correct. You can do that. The calculations were adding up. They just weren't taking into account the quartering winds. So if you add all of that together, and the little fact that there was a Hurricane Ella coming anytime soon, they got a little antsy. So what do? You are getting awards, you're at the peak of your career, and there's like this little problem, the building might collapse and 200,000 people might die, and the hurricane coming in. So what do? What's your guess? Extra pillars? No. That would have been my guess too. No, they did something. Evacuations? No, that's the opposite of what they did. Okay, more on that later. So they got... Yeah, so I love this story because they were like, let's just weld all the bolts. And you know what? We're not going to tell anybody about it because we're a little shy. The opposite of evacuation. So they had this little problem that they didn't know exactly how much time it would take to weld all the things. They didn't know. They had about 3 months, a little bit over 3 months for the hurricane before the hurricane hits. And they ran out of welders. So they started importing welders from around 100 miles radius into New York just to do that. And you would think that they would just be like, okay, let's do it 24/7 and let's be done with it as soon as possible. But that was not Lemessurier way. Lemessurier way was to tell them you can only work at night. We don't want anybody to learn about it, and we don't want people going to the office to be too scared that their thing is going to collapse. So what they did instead was plan an evacuation, let the authorities know about a potential disaster that's going to kill 200,000 people, get a lot of volunteers on standby, to basically monitor the weather, look at the forecast every hour, and be there in case they need to start the panic and evacuation. They also had this really annoying problem, the fact that they didn't have enough welders, and the welders were like, we don't like welding at night. We would prefer to do it during the day. So they got the welders union head, probably convinced them to work at night, and all the welders who were available and weren't on the job actually came and did that. You got the reputation at stake, you got 200,000 potential fatalities, and they got to work. It took about 3 months to do that. Every night, welders would show up where everybody finished in the building. They would uncover a bit to weld, they would weld the thing, they would put it back, and they would pretend they were never there. And the people coming into the office were none the wiser. The 25,000 tons of structure that can crumble any moment if you blow hard enough at it, nobody knew about it. And then a miracle happened. The hurricane was like, you know what? I'm done here. And it just went away. Who knows what will happen if it actually hit the thing? So what do you do to keep a secret like that? Let's say if you want to keep a secret between two people, they cannot be one person. This stayed secret for nearly 20 years, until the 1995, where some journalists got invited to a dinner party when someone posted about it. And they got the scoop, and then at that stage, Lemessurier was like 70-something or whatever. He was like, you know what, I'll tell you everything. And the story broke in the New Yorker in 1995, and people went into two camps. Some of them were like, okay, fine, we're going to use it as a use case to teach at our university course. Some of them were a little pissed. If you were one of the people going to that office and you didn't know that your life was in danger, I probably would have been pissed. So the things that most people agree were positives. The fact that he actually eventually did listen to the haters. By the way, that the invited journalist reminds me of the news that broke yesterday. You guys followed? Yeah. Okay, I'll skip that. He admitted the mistake eventually, and it wasn't easy. They had to actually get the insurer to pay out all of that. They had to get everybody to team up together to fix this. Otherwise, it's a big thing. It was an expensive endeavor. They assembled a team. He actually used his personal connections to get like the wind tunnel expert and the welders union person. Turned out, in retrospective, that nobody actually checked his numbers because he was so famous at the time within his little community that there was no actual peer review of his numbers, and it was all done by hand, obviously. He probably also shouldn't have kept it secret for 20 years. Just saying. So what do we learn from that? This, by the way, does this sound familiar to anybody? Any recent outages that kind of resemble like that? Maybe not 20 years, but 20 days? 20 months? 20 weeks? No? Okay, you guys are saints. You are just perfect. So, apart from what he did, the real lesson here was, let's not merge things that nobody reviewed. Maybe let's not keep it a secret. And the main lesson is, don't go to dinner parties. Or, you could also take it a little bit more serious and say, if Lemessurier managed to dig himself out of that hole, and he's still considered a decent structural engineer, maybe don't go too hard on yourself, because, you will mess up even worse afterwards. So the future you will help will save you. And also, guys, don't worry, if you've read any news recently, it's all going to be LLMs soon. We'll be out of our jobs anyway. Anyway, so on that terrible disappointment, I want to welcome you to today. What happens next is we're going to take a coffee break. We're roughly on time. And then we're split into 3 screens. This is screen 1, screen 2, and screen 3 that are happening in parallel. I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors who are probably there, so please applaud very loudly so they come again. New Relic, Cast AI, Densify, and Atlas. And in case you like that kind of stuff, I tend to talk a lot about reliability. So this is my LinkedIn. Back to the chaos engineering, I wrote a book about it, and I'm still trying to find the 2 people who read it. So if you are in the audience, come and talk to me about it. I tried to make it a little bit less random chaos monkey and a little bit more science. So if you're interested in that stuff, grab me. I love talking about that, and we're going to have plenty of opportunity. And I also run Hockey Stick podcast, which talks about hockey stick moments in tech. If you'd like to, if you've got a guest who would be interested in coming on that, or you just want to give it a listen, you're that. And do that by scanning the QR code and jump on my LinkedIn, slide into my DMs.